Stuff. Well, welcome everyone to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Absolutely thrilled to have what I expect to be a real insightful and enlightening conversation with Dr. Uma Naidoo, nutritional psychiatrist. Uma, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Abhay. I'm really excited to be here.
I was thinking a little bit about what we do on a day-to-day basis in our practice and in connecting the dots a lot of times for people and producing aha moments. But at the same time, we also do a lot of myth busting and try and combat disinformation at the same time. So I'm curious for you now your very extensive experience in this field and pretty exciting field. What's perhaps a surprising myth that you find yourself commonly combating when it comes to nutritional psychiatry?
Actually, there are two, if I could
Yeah,
take the liberty
please.
of asking you to. The first is that people don't realize food affects mood and that food affects anxiety. They assume that they actually have experienced it if you ask them, but they haven't put those facts together. So the first thing about nutritional lifestyle and metabolic psychiatry, which is the clinic that I run, is that people do not associate food with how they feel emotionally. And that it actually has a clinical and physiological and other impact beyond diabetes and hypertension, those conditions. The second is I often get asked, I know that you tell people to never eat sugar. And actually, that's a nuance because your body needs sugar. And there's a lot of groups of individuals and people and let's say communities that just are very against sugar. It's not that. It's the type and quality of sugar and where you consume it from. So I think that those are two huge myths because, yes, I wouldn't want people eating candy and cake every day. But at the same time, they need to understand that berries are very different forms. Yes, it is sugar. It's a very different form and your body does need that balance. So those are the two things in my little journey that I've come across very repeatedly.
Or when people hear that and they even are surprised to learn of these links and how powerful these links are when it comes to either food being so intimately connected to mood, and then on top of that the role, an important role perhaps, that natural sugars may have. Um, when they do have that surprise, is there now a particular informational piece or something that you have to then use as far as storytelling to really
Mm.
cement those two pieces together to ensure that they will actually have trust in themselves and their instincts
Right.
to really follow that.
What I tend to do, if we're speaking specifically more on sugar, is I educate them about a few things. And when I say educate, it's because these are not things we are taught. Doctors don't yet learn nutrition, and it's not our fault. We have to learn it elsewhere if we want to know more. But for example, 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon. Our food labels have grams, and no one cooks or bakes in grams. So there's a disconnect right there. But 4 grams is 1 teaspoon. So on a half cup of yogurt that's fruited, and you've heard your doctor say blueberries are great for your brain. Unfortunately, fruited yogurt can have up to 8 teaspoons of sugar. Very different if you do plain yogurt, dairy or non-dairy, add in berries and a little bit of cinnamon for sweetness. And the berries can be fresh or frozen, very different product. But so just teaching them that one fact helps them look at the label when they go into whatever it is, whatever food or beverage that they want to consume, including kombucha, which I like, but it depends on the amount of sugar added to overcome the fermented taste, right? And then the other thing I share with them is that fruit is something our body needs. We should be having enough fruit in our daily diet, but where you get the fruit from and the amount that you eat and how you eat it is key. Let me break that down for you. Um, berries, yes, they are sugar, but if you have a quarter cup of berries as a snack during your day, or even strawberries, whatever it is that you like, I happen to like berries, and I like clementines, or an apple, but those are very different from taking the apple, the quarter cup of berries, and pulverizing them in a smoothie.
Mm.
When that happens, the quarter cup, which may take you 5 minutes to chew as you doing whatever you're doing, will take less than 5 seconds to hit your bloodstream because it's pulverized, it's liquid, right? And that impact is very different. So yes, by all means, sweeten up a smoothie with a few berries or some strawberries. I'd rather you add spinach and greens for the fiber. Have some berries, but don't put a ton of it in because it's actually having a very impact on your blood glucose than having a little cup of berries. But understanding the form, understanding how they eat it, and then the amount. Because blueberries are great, you should not be eating a tub every day because that amount of sugar is still sugar, even if it's natural and is impacting your body and your mind in a different way. So just having a few things like that they can experience in real time and understand because they can read a label or whatever it is more convincing than me saying, well, this research showed that.
Right.
Because honestly, people lose you at the word research. Right? We
Yeah.
know that it's important to back up these facts because it's not soft science anymore. But honestly, people on every day, they just want to know, should I eat the fruit or yogurt? Yeah,
Mm.
but not really. But here's a good option for you.
No, I love that. I mean, like having at least the practical examples and something that can be applied in everyday life is huge. And we're going to talk a little bit more about anxiety and depressions later on. But I'm curious if what, if any, nutritional guidance is there for moments of content and peace or even celebration, because we know that excitement and elation and they can celebrate indulgence or gluttony
Yeah,
and
right.
really throw us overboard sometimes. So, is there just as much as food can prompt anxiety? Is there also guidance around how food can certainly calm your mind and bring you back into balance, especially when you're overly excited?
It can really make a difference, and the choices you make and how you consume them are important. One thing I will remind people at this moment is that hydration is so important. So, just drinking water is very key because when people are dehydrated, they can get much more anxious. And often, if we're excited and something great is coming on, we might forget. We might be having a glass of wine and forget the water, or we might be indulging in something that's a lot of fun or having a great moment and forget some basic stuff. A lot of what I talk about, Abhay, is very boring. It's very boring, but it's very relevant. And let me just share why it's boring. Because I'm not saying never eat spinach, only eat protein, never look at a bean, whatever the latest trend is by whichever influencer or even doctor that's coming out there. The basic tenets of eating have really never changed. It's how Americans have eaten and what the food industry and pharmaceutical companies have kind of done with the marketing. And I think we need to educate ourselves. So I feel that some basic things that we can do is eat in moderation, eat everything in moderation. If it's your birthday tomorrow, have a piece of cake if that's what you want to do. Your family gets you a beautiful cake. I'm not saying never eat it, just have a piece, but know that the other meals in your day or the next day are salad and healthy foods that you're usually doing, like an 80-20 balance. But those words are not catchy on Instagram. Balance and moderation, they don't get views, they don't get me followers. But I have to stick to what's true to what I believe because I want to help the most number of people. I don't want to just help 3,000 people today and then have them forget that by January.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think understanding that we can eat these foods, but even if it's salmon, a healthy food, if you consume seafood, you don't have to eat it 3 times a day. It's all about making that not only that moderation, but having what I call a balanced nutritional psychiatry plate or even an anti-anxiety plate becomes key.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, I think I espouse to that quite a bit in the sense that moderation and balance are so critical for not just our physical harmony, but certainly our brain's harmony, if you will.
That's right.
And finding that is actually critical when I'm having conversations in the office, but then also in regular practice, right? So in a way, this is a way now of your thinking that you've adopted and you've been, really sort of in practice, but also educating so many both patients and colleagues about this. I'm so curious for you. Was there an aha moment for you that really, or even a series of sort of tipping points that took you from that threshold and over the threshold of traditional psychiatry to venture into nutrition? I mean, what was maybe the tipping point, or was there sort of a series of those tipping points for you?
There were actually, thank you for asking that question. There were actually two aha moments that I'm happy to share. And to take a step back from those two moments, it starts in my childhood, um, where I was just surrounded by healthy eating and nutrition and good and tasty food, and was really blessed to have a family. My grandmother cooked, and I would spend time during the day because I tell everyone I was a preschool dropout. I don't know what my
Right.
parents were thinking. I refused to go
Yeah.
because I wanted to hang out with her. She was so much more fun. And she would teach me, and I would watch her cook, and I'd do little. I was really little. I don't think I even reached the height of the table, but I'd do little tasks for her because I was involved in that experience of the fresh vegetables and stuff. So nutrition, unbeknownst to me until later in life, was very much a part of what I was interested in. Healthy eating, delicious food, spices, also eating in community, because my grandparents would sit and eat lunch with me. Then my parents would pick me up after they finished work and school. My mom was in medical school, and um, that was also important. So one of my youngest memories as a resident, really green, still learning the ropes, was a patient yelled at me because he thought I caused him to gain weight from prescribing an SSRI. Now, he'd read the label, but he'd only seen me a week before. He'd only just started the med, and he'd already come to me a little bit heavy. But he had this massive cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee in his hand, favorite coffee in Boston. Actually started in the Boston area.
There you go.
And so I know, timid as I was, something occurred to me intuitively, and I said, well, I know you're upset. Let's break this down and talk about it, but would you mind telling me what you put in your coffee today? And not only did that distract him, he shared valuable information. Quarter cup of ultra processed creamer, because that's what the stores usually have, because it was a big size, right? And then 8 teaspoons of sugar. So although I'm not much of a calorie counter, because I think the quality of food and portions are more important, I broke it down for him quickly on the computer. And he then realized, before he even ate breakfast, how many empty calories he was consuming every day. And it's almost like a light bulb went off. And that was one of my first aha moments, because I realized it changed the relationship. We went on to have a really good therapeutic relationship. We didn't need to raise his medication dose because he wanted to do different things. He wanted to drink his coffee differently. He wanted to eat differently, and he was engaged just by sharing a simple nutritional detail that I was intuitively trying to work out for him. It taught me the power in a clinical relationship. And the second aha moment was when I was unexpectedly diagnosed with cancer. I was blessed by being exposed to some of the best doctors in the world, so I've had that on my side. But one of the things that I was still struggling with is the amount of anxiety it brought, because it came out of nowhere. And when I realized I was physically experiencing anxiety for the first time, I decided, it's one of those look in the mirror moment, like, you do this every day, like, why don't you do it for yourself?
Right.
Because
Right.
it's why don't you start applying these principles? And because you generally want to prepare a lot of your meals at home, I started to have my grandmother's like golden milk several times a day. I prepared my food more mindfully. I really leaned into food. I ate out much less often, not only because either myself or someone would help prepare something for me, but I really used food as medicine. And every single week, my doctors would ask me, what are you doing? Because we're so delighted you're not having these side effects, and we're so glad that you are tolerating this better. You felt like someone, well, you give us great food, but it's really not that great. It's
Right.
pretty bad in the cancer units. And
Right.
I should carry in my own little lunch bag or whatever it was. But they would literally want to know, because they noticed the correlation. I wasn't having the side effects. I was actually, thank goodness, thriving in treatment, doing okay. The natural things happen, the natural side effects of chemo happen, but that you can't prevent, like hair loss and stuff like that. But for the most part, the other side, that was my second moment, because I thought, wow, if I can feel better and feel less anxious and not have these side effects, think about how powerful it can be for more people. So it really just spurred me on to want to do more and dive deeper.
I'm in thinking about that, there's two things come to mind. The first one I wanted to ask was, what did you actually have to unlearn about yourself in order to appreciate that success and really understand how powerful nutrition was in crafting mood and really sort of carving out this niche for yourself. Were there elements of your own background or even your own thinking as a doctor that you had to, in a way, unlearn and sort of unprogram?
It's an interesting question because in some ways I was sort of doing both, right? I was, on the one hand, getting my chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, all of that good stuff. But at the same time, I was embracing a holistic and integrated approach.
Mm,
So I
yeah.
think, if anything, it was a little bit of the unlearning of the medical system, and was proven to me by the questions my doctors were asking me, which is, what are you doing? We want our other patients to do that. And all I would say is, I'm cooking more often, family is cooking more often for me, but I'm leaning into these ingredients, right? And we know that the same plan may not affect everyone, but it was a little bit of unlearning of relying only on medicine. I took the absolutely what was necessary for my treatment, but I also didn't necessarily lean on any extra medications that were needed. So if it was part of my protocol, I would take it. And the unlearning was, well, I'm not sure that I need that. If I can manage my nausea this way, if I can, ginger is great for nausea, and as long as it's not interacting with my medications, I'm okay. So a little bit of that, like, how can we curtail this? So it's an interesting question that you ask, because it was a mixed bag of things I was doing, but I was unlearning, not relying heavily on the medical system all the time.
Yeah. Well, and then the second thing I was going to ask was, that comes to mind is that this was perhaps a signature event for you that came out of crisis. And that in a way was also some of the ingredients were not only coming out of crisis, but thankfully you're someone who is highly educated and you have the privilege of being a physician. And so are we also how do you perhaps marry some of these aha moments for people who are either not at that educational level or not with that kind of financial background and privilege to have
Right.
the best care and even the best
Right.
information available to them? Can these same kinds of great aha moments happen for those who do not have that kind of success and privilege?
I think that, so let me take it outside of cancer care only and just take it into medical care and kind of social and economic sort of demographics. And what I would say is, one of the things I really focus on in my platform and my work is, how can we have everyone have access to the information at the very least, right? I may not be able to change the supermarket you have in your region, but I can certainly educate you. If you have a dollar store, I will literally go into every dollar store I see, if I have time, and see what actual whole food they have. Like, they have canned fish. They actually have canned salmon. It's now $1.25, by the way. Not sure why it's
Yeah.
still called a dollar store. But, but you can, I don't want you to buy a lot of the other kind of, I don't want you to buy the other food there. But they do have canned fish, and sometimes they have canned tuna or canned chicken, which
Hmm.
at least is actual food.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that should be your only choice, but I will try to think about ways that people can navigate a supermarket. How can you live on a budget? Can you go into those center aisles and buy those canned fish, mussels, oysters, all, by the way, great grain food, beans, legumes, lentils that will feed a family for much, much longer, and actually save you money? Can you buy frozen vegetables over fresh? How do you think about it? So I'm a big proponent of, wherever you are, if you try to think of the whole food versus a processed version of it, easiest being orange juice. Think about, can you rather get the orange for your family? You're going to get the vitamins and nutrients, everything you need, versus the OJ in the cotton, which has added sugar to it. Can you think about having a small? Do you have space to have a small vegetable garden and grow maybe leafy greens? Can you afford to do that? And is it of economic benefit to you? Can you think about buying a food costing expense? When we did at culinary school, can you buy a rotisserie chicken if your family consumes chicken? Because believe it or not, it's usually just cooked in its own fat and skin, versus three for your young family, three fast food meals with the toy and the soda or the milkshake. Because I promise you, if I showed you that with the one rotisserie chicken, you could create 3 meals over 3 days, 1 meal a day, and save money because you're not buying the junk, that will teach a mom or a parent or a caregiver to make a slight shift in what they're doing. And so I think it's how do we approach it and how do we help more people understand it's just a little bit more thinking that is involved, and not we may not all have the same information, but at least try to eat the whole food.
I love the guide wires here because there are so many tentacles, as you mentioned, so many intersections here with economy and equity. And on top of that, just even taking into account what one's own personal situation is. And it's great to kind of tailor that to one's own situation. Given the audience that we certainly are speaking to, and on top of that, just our own common backgrounds here, I wonder if you can help connect the dots a little bit between your work and some of the common themes that we see in the South Asian community, right? So whether that be our own nutritional guide wires and the things that you mentioned already with your own upbringing, but then, the lives that we live globally, right? There are common themes that we see in the South Asian community, not just in America, but, worldwide. And are there some particular guidance? Is there some particular guidance that you've now been able to gain some insight towards that you can share perhaps that are very relevant to our own community?
Well, and first and foremost, I feel like the South Asian food is underappreciated because it is super delicious, and the use of
I can vouch for
spices is
that.
not
That's for sure.
the use of spices, is something that's undervalued as well. Because people don't, I'm not saying spicy, just the use of spices, because it can be so rich in antioxidants and anti-inflammatory ingredients. And the pure spice has no salt or no sugar, no added calories, literally. So it's a pretty healthy way to go to flavor food. Not a spice blend, but the actual spice. I think that in thinking about it, especially from the metabolic standpoint, I think that, culturally, different parts of India, where many of us or our ancestors originate from, eat certain starches, which I think that if we thought a little bit more carefully about flipping the ratio on less of the starch, still enjoying it, still having it, I'm not saying give it up, but thinking about the type of grain that is used and leaning in more to a plant forward diet and healthy, clean protein. So if we eat fish and beef and chicken and everything, where are we getting it from? Where are we sourcing it? Can we look at the sources of that? Can we look at the portions? If we don't and we're vegetarian, leaning into those vegetables, but maybe lightening up on the level that vegetables are cooked, because it will give us less nutrition. I'm less worried about the fats. Like I'm not so worried about butter or ghee. I'm much more concerned about deep frying. And can we think out of the box about learning to air fry more of the stuff that we enjoy? How can we rethink our kitchens? Lean into the spices, add in the vegetables just because we all need more fiber. Clean sources of whether it's our chicken or whatever meats that you eat, or seafood. And how do we change that ratio of, when I was a child, one of my grandmothers, I would remember when she ate lunch, she ate a little bit of the curries that were prepared, but a very large serving of basmati rice, right? And she was very petite. She was never overweight or anything like that. I think times have changed, and we are living in a different era where food has been industrialized in the United States, and you've lived in the United States, as I have now for most of my life. Whether you like it or not, that's the food you eat, even if you go on a healthier route. So
Yeah.
I think that South Asians need to rethink enjoying the foods that we love, lightening them up in a certain way, leaning into our spices, and changing the portions and ratios of some of the foods we eat.
It's almost like we need the sort of six South Asian pillars that
That's true.
that
Yeah,
can be very catered
I like
to
that.
us. And in a way, if you think about your grandmother and the difference between what her existence was in India versus now a population like all of us in our middle ages
Hmm.
and even those who
Hmm.
are seniors as well, for those of us out there, is there one or more of these kind of six pillars that really speaks to aging gracefully, that really speaks to combating dementia, that really speaks
Hmm.
to staving off the anxieties, perhaps, and the pitfalls of aging? Just like you mentioned, sort of like, not only just the portions we consume, the
Hmm.
content that we're consuming, how do we, as South Asians, perhaps really gracefully age in the context of nutrition and combating some of these mental health and mental hygiene ills?
Believe it or not, some of it, there's a real overlap with what, people who may not be South Asian should be doing. And I'll come back to those. And the next time you and I talk, I'm going to have more exciting words for you. But I still come back to that sort of that balance and consistency of what we do. Because one of the things that is a huge plus in our communities is there's a sense of community. And many families are multi-generational. So if you think about the work of the Blue Zones, they talk about eating in community and having your tribe and having your family around or having your village around and eating. It's one of the things that is a plus in our communities because much of it is built in. And I say to my younger patients who are living alone in New York or Boston, get on Zoom and talk to your families, create a Friends Thanksgiving, which I think is a great idea because your family, you may not be able to get to your family this holiday. But I think that it also comes down to those, tweaking a little bit of, say, someone is aging and they are still consuming a lot more of the carbohydrate balance like my grandmother did. It's different now because they're at a different age and stage than she was when I was little. So just maybe switching that up, adding in those blueberries, leaning into turmeric with a pinch of black pepper. There's a good amount of evidence for that. Having that golden chai. My trick with golden chai is because I traveled so much, I was always, my plant-based milk where I was always throwing them out. So I just make a little bit of hemp milk and I have the recipe in my book, Calm Your Mind with Food. Easy to make and I can make a small amount. And it's super creamy when you make it. So I actually now do my golden chai with that, but I have it more often. Understanding that those are ways that we can think about. But the other thing that aging South Asians and others need to think about is muscle mass, because they're dealing with sarcopenia. So making sure they're getting enough protein. If you consume Greek yogurt, great source of protein. If you consume meat and other foods, all of those have great sources of protein. Don't lose sight of that because some of my older relatives don't want to eat as much anymore, and they still have to eat enough protein to feel healthy and also movement. Usually they have the yoga and meditation down. They kind of, they usually have that down. And another thing the community has going for them. But I think if we built in, walking.
Yeah.
I can't see some of my older aunts and uncles always going to the gym because they didn't grow up that way. But can they walk?
Right.
Can they walk their dogs? Can they walk to get the newspaper? Can they walk to get a cup of coffee? Can they just walk in their community? And just that sense of community is so important.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I mean, especially for bone health and for mental health, you can
both.
certainly do both of those.
Getting some sunlight, which helps their vitamin D before they put on sunblock. About 10 minutes before you put on your sunscreen or sunblock is a great way. And low vitamin D is associated with increased anxiety, increased depression. So it's just an easy thing to do.
How about the opposite? I mean, I'm a pediatrician, so I'm dealing with young children and teens and young families a lot. So in the same way, we have one end of the spectrum where we are trying to particularly, gracefully age. How about those youngsters out there who are particularly those teens and young adults who are out there? How can we actually help establish and solidify great nutritional habits, especially in an era where we have anxiety pitfalls at every corner seemingly?
I think it's a great question because, as I look at it and I see the level of anxiety in teens and young kids, I also then look at what they're eating. And, it's in the environment. California is actually on the cutting edge of what they're changing in the school diets and stuff like that. But not everywhere is the same. And I know other places are trying, but we're not there yet. So I'm a big proponent of how you eat at home is what you learn. So I think as parents, as hard as it is, restocking the kitchen differently is important. Involving them in food purchasing, whether it's a farmer's market or the supermarket, teaching them, little kids, teaching them colors and textures of food and fruit, having them understand, that there's a farmer's market or there's a farm you can take them to and where food comes from. That becomes, I say this in part because I sort of indirectly, I didn't have as expansive knowledge of it when I was little, but I was definitely exposed. And I know how it became really part of my DNA was understanding where food came from and how it was cooked and was prepared. I think that's really key. And I know that what I'm saying is going to make it hard on parents. Kids might be eating snacks that you don't want them to eat, but can you start to switch it up? Can you start to make ice cream from fruit? Can you start to make snacks that may take a little bit more time, but introduce that along? Because if you have candy on the counter, that's what they're going to eat. If you have cookies on the counter, that's what they're going to eat when they're hungry. But if you have and start to switch out what breakfast is, one of my pet peeves is cereal. And can we change that? Can we, and I just want to be very clear, I'm not judging people around this. I'm just saying,
No.
can we rethink what we're doing?
Yeah.
Because these things we now know are not great for us.
Yeah. No, I think, again, having the rainbow available for
Right.
people and really making sure that, as you say, the greener, the better for those choices. And I think, reclaiming this notion that, you can set great, just like we set great behavioral boundaries as
Yeah.
parents, setting those nutritional boundaries, is also a wonderful way to sort of involve the family, involve the children, having
Yeah.
those choices be made by everybody and almost in a way empowering those habits from the very beginning.
I'd love to share a story recently. So I had a client I was working with, and based on the work we were doing, she was now trying to change things at home. And she said to me, my son eats this bag of snacks. That's a very popular one. And I suddenly started to read what was in it, and I was horrified. So I said, well, what did you do? She said, well, as he finished that last bag, because she didn't want to waste it, she asked him to read the ingredients. He couldn't pronounce most of them. She then taught him that was not food, and that she shared that she was now educated that this was not a good idea. And she said, look, I want you to have snacks, but I'm going to buy you healthy versions. So look for versions that have fewer nasty ingredients in them. And he was a little upset, and he said, but I like these. And she said, well, if you're going to have snacks at home, I'm going to replace them in the future, but I want you to know why I'm doing it. And he's a teenager, and he was pretty fed up with her, but he was also educated about that. So it's also how you do it. And so she started to buy these healthy versions of things that may not have been, well, for one thing, they're not going to tap into his sort of addiction circuits and reward,
Yeah.
because they all are engineered to be a certain way with our reward pathways. So they'll be different. But it was sort of, if you're going to have a snack, this is what you're going to have. And you can also have apples and other fruit available. And the crunchy snack will be this version. And we'll start to explore healthier options. But I'm no longer buying that.
Yeah. And I
So,
think, I mean, that's a great example of like, look, let me explain why. And at the
that's
same
fine. I'm not
time,
just being nasty. Yeah.
right, right. But those boundaries and kind of laying out the groundwork for hopefully future habits and sort of cutting off that dopamine,
Right.
response
The
is very
reward. That's
helpful.
right.
I'm curious for you, all of this, of course, a lot of times, at least it's quite buzzworthy right now and has been for a little bit, but at the center of it may be just our gut microbiome. So I'm curious if this is such a major key in our healthy balance, particularly between that state of stagnancy and anxiety and the peace and motion that we enjoy in our lives, especially a peaceful motion. What behavioral cues perhaps should people be more aware of when trying to curate their gut microbiome to establish that kind of great balance that we always seek?
So a few ideas about the gut microbiome and the United States. Most people in this country do not consume enough fiber. That's been shown in research. We're actually very focused on protein, and you should have protein by all means. Maybe not the massive amounts people are guiding us right now to eat, but you should have good sources of protein and enough protein in your diet. Most people ignore fiber. And where do you get fiber from? Rule number one is fiber. So vegetables, fruit, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, healthy whole grains. You don't get it from animal proteins or seafood. But lean into those vegetables and plant foods is your best way of getting in fiber. So think the colors, the textures, the different types of all foods. And we're not talking Skittles candy. We're not talking about that kind of
Not
stuff.
that
We've got to be
rainbow.
very
Yeah.
specific. Exactly. They have patient time in that one. So that's the one thing. The second thing is other things that really help with gut and healing. Things like fermented foods. Every culture has a fermented food. So pick a few that you like and your family likes and add in a little bit every day. I like kimchi. And, there are great store-bought versions from good stores that you can get. You can make it at home, but a little bit with a salad or whatever it is you're eating. It's actually giving your gut fermented foods, and they've been found to be very anti-inflammatory, and this has been shown in research, to the gut. So that's another easy thing. Add in those probiotics through things like plain yogurt, dairy or non-dairy yogurts, and that's another great way to do it. Some people take a supplement if that's your choice. Not against supplements, but it may be something to think about. But if you're going to take a supplement, do it consistently, because taking it for 2 weeks and stopping just reverses the changes in your microbiome. So if you found a good probiotic that you like, stick with it, and continue to take it, but as well as adjusting your diet. Hydration is another one. And the fifth one is got to be cutting back on the sort of junk foods, fast food, extra sugary foods that we're eating, because that's what throws off the balance in the gut, as well as our lifestyle and other things. So those are just a few ways to get started.
With all of those great instructions and reminders, are there particular ways that people should also? So let's say I'm practicing all those things, but I notice that, hey, in the process of doing this, that I can also notice my patterns of behavior and that I can
Yeah,
be aware of my moods. And as I'm trying to titrate this and find the right method forward, I mean, something that's so important, right, is consistency and
right.
trying to find that great consistency. So, are there particular ways that I could be more mindful of my own imbalances and then start tweaking the diet so that I can actually reverse course or quickly adjust in a way?
Right. So it's a pillar of nutritional psychiatry that I call body intelligence. And as I said at the beginning, people have often noticed something related to food, but they don't recognize or put the facts together. It's taking into account emotionally. You can journal about it, you can type notes on your phone, or you can just say to your loved one or say to your family friend, doctor, whoever it is, I ate this and I felt that. Take note of those things, because here's a nuance. I mentioned fiber. Someone with IBS, IBC, SIBO, other gut-related conditions, they can't just start eating a bunch of fiber. Many of us actually can increase our fiber gently and, not feel sick. But those individuals can really feel more uncomfortable, because it's not that the fiber is bad, it's just that they have a GI condition which, doesn't tolerate that amount of fiber, or that they are dealing with other things that need to help the condition that's underlying. So I feel like paying attention to body intelligence is key. I've had people tell me that, they switch out a glass of wine, or they have dinner earlier. If they do drink wine, they have it earlier in the day. If they have dinner, they have it earlier. That they have switched out what they eat for breakfast or lunch or dinner, and they feel different. Paying attention is different. Why do you think they sell donuts in pairs?
Hmm.
Because you can never eat one. You eat one and you die for three more, because it's not satiating. It's not the same as a chia pudding. Because you might eat a little bit of chia pudding with nuts and seeds and berries, and you'll be like full for several hours.
Right,
Very
right.
different. So I think paying attention to those things become important, because they help guide you on your own, can self-direct towards a better choice of a food, a snack, even on the go, if you're rushing or you've forgotten your lunch at home or whatever it might be, is a way to understand what your body is coping with,
Yeah.
or responding to or reacting to.
I love that, especially the idea of thinking a little bit about either journaling or being very aware of food and the resulting mood that it comes. Let me get you out of here on this. I mean, we're recording this around Thanksgiving, and this will likely air sometime in the new year, where we're hitting the reset button often. And
Right.
so, for you personally, in the insights that you've gained and the experiences you've had, and being a cancer survivor, and also equipped with the knowledge as a nutritional psychiatrist, what perhaps are some of the either rituals or resolutions that you hope to now kind of gather and really solidify for yourself that might be great examples for others to follow?
The first and foremost, I'll just tell I'm not a perfect eater. I try to help people, but I'm always also trying to help myself. Not selfishly, but more that none of us eats the perfect diet or lives perfectly. So having that sense of patience with ourselves and grace with ourselves is important, especially in the new year, because we usually had a fun, celebration over the holidays or whatever it might be. So rather than holding regrets, think about your way forward. One of the things that I find useful is whether it's a birthday or party or cupcake, whatever it might be, what am I doing next? Am I going to build in more treadmill time? Am I going to have more salads this week? What am I going to do? Creating some sort of um, a meal planning structure actually really helps. One of the things I've been traveling a lot, so one of the things I want to build in the new year is back to my batch cooking much more often because it's been hard to do with not being home. And my planning, usually for me, I do 3 days at a time. I think for me to prepare 7 days at a time of food doesn't appeal to me, so I do 3 days, and that's what works for me and for my family. But bringing that back in a more structured way is going to be important for me. An easy thing is hydration. And, having a sustainable water bottle, even in winter, even when it's cold. Now airports everywhere. And I think you guys led the way in San Francisco, have these great water fountains with water that you can fill. So make sure you're doing that with whatever else you consume. So I think that these are the things that will help propel us forward and leave the regrets behind. You can always you can always move it forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, being resolute and being graceful and giving ourselves license to build our own journeys, both with nutrition and our own mental health. Thank you so much, Uma, for sharing all your insights, for all the work that you're doing. I would urge everyone to go out and read your book and calm our minds with food as much as we can, and we'll certainly take away any of your information and insights, whether that's with Tom Brady or not. We love it all. So thank you so much for joining, and I
I'm
hope we can
delighted to
visit
be
with you
listening.
again.
Thank you. Definitely.
Thank you
Thanks so
again.
much for having me, Abhay. Lovely to see you.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Stay tuned.